Hey guys, we're taking our time tonight. The world outside has already slowed down. Yellow squares are fading in the windows of high-rise buildings. Someone will still be flipping through the tape. Someone will be late for the last tram. And you are already lying down, feeling your body slowly becoming heavy. Silence and the echo of the day are mixed in the air. And it is time to surrender to philosophy that sounds like a lullaby. But let's be honest, you would probably never last a whole night alone with your thoughts without any distraction. A person would simply crumble under the weight of their own ideas. That is why we are looking for the words of Plato, Seneca, or Buddha. They become soft pillows for the mind. So, before you settle down, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I am doing here. And I will be glad if you write in the comments where exactly you are listening to me now and what time it is. This will create our own night map of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a quiet background hum, and let's dive into today's journey together. You're lying there, and the world refuses to rest. Even when you've turned off the lights, your phone hums one last time on the nightstand. It promises nothing new, yet you can't resist the impulse to check. Another notification, another piece of news, another advertisement that insists you're missing something. This is the paradox of modern life. You long for sleep, but your mind has been trained to sprint on a treadmill that never powers down. Think of the city outside. Cars flow past like blood cells in glowing veins. LED screens flicker in the distance. Convenience stores still buzzing with music at 2 a.m. Once nights were for owls and thieves. Now, they are for endless consumption, scrolling until your vision turns into static. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution or the invention of the smartphone had a bigger impact on human sleep cycles. But either way, your ancestors would be appalled at how little you rest. Your body is cleverer than you think. It registers every ping of your device, every fluorescent light, every late night rerun you promise yourself is the last. The brain treats them as signals of survival. Stay awake, something is happening. And so, even lying still, your system behaves as though a saber-toothed tiger is pacing just outside the cave. No wonder falling asleep feels like negotiating with a fussy bureaucrat. You might laugh, but in medieval Europe people actually had a thing called first sleep and second sleep. They would nod off shortly after sunset, wake up for an hour or two around midnight, pray, snack, gossip with neighbors, and then fall into the deeper second sleep until dawn. Today, even one sleep feels like an impossible luxury. Instead of gentle candlelight and silence, you get blue screens and urgent emails sent at 11:48 p.m. and the cruelest trick. You think you're in control. You believe that finishing just one more task or watching just one more video is harmless. But deep down, you know the rhythm. The more stimulation you take in, the more restless your night becomes. Your bedroom, which should be a sanctuary, becomes another extension of the office, the news cycle, the marketplace. Remember when we thought electricity was a miracle? Now, those same glowing lights trick your brain into believing it's still daytime. The circadian rhythm, the ancient drum inside your biology, gets drowned out by Netflix autoplay. And so, you lie there, too tired to stay awake, and too wired to sleep. There's something tragic and comical about it. We've built civilizations, invented rockets, and mapped genomes, yet half the population can't manage the one thing a shepherd on a Greek hillside mastered thousands of years ago: closing the eyes and letting go. But tonight, you're rebelling in the smallest way possible. You've put aside the noise for a moment, choosing this quiet path of philosophy. You're telling your brain, enough, I don't need another update. I need the wisdom of slowness. Maybe you can already feel your shoulders unclench, your breathing soften, the flicker of screens replaced with the flicker of an inner candle. That's the secret beginning. Noticing how restless the world is, and daring to turn away. It isn't about hating technology or shaming yourself for being human. It's about realizing that the race outside never ends, but your night should. The world will always spin, the timelines will always refresh. But your body and mind, they require stillness. So let the restless world whirl on. You don't have to. You can listen instead, surrendering, allowing this quiet narration to pull you gently from the noisy present into the timeless embrace of thought. Because right here, in this fragile silence, the story begins. Your room is quiet, but your head is a food court at noon. Thoughts clatter on trays, announcements keep dinging, and somewhere a tiny inner barista is yelling your order is ready even though you didn't order anything. You try to float, but the day won't let go. That message you forgot to answer. That bill that lurks like a cat under the sofa. That conversation where you said no worries, and then worried for 4 hours. The body lies down. The mind keeps its shoes on. Unfinished tasks have a primitive talent for survival. They nibble at attention, scratch at the door, and multiply in darkness like gremlins who definitely ate after midnight. There's even a name for their persistence: the Zeigarnik effect, noticed by a 20th century psychologist who realized we remember incomplete actions far more fiercely than finished ones. The brain, bless it, is a clerk with a stack of open folders under moral duty to keep the lights on. No wonder, when you finally slip under the covers, you get a roll call of everything you still should have done. Remember that midnight wakefulness between first sleep and second sleep. In older households, that hour was often given to prayer, letters, or quiet talk. You, however, hold a different vigil, a glow-in-the-dark council meeting where unpaid invoices, awkward social memories, and imaginary arguments all demand the microphone. Historians still argue whether people in pre-industrial societies worried less because their lives were simpler, or if they simply had different categories of dread: crop failure, wolves, the occasional plague. Either way, your inner wolf is your to-do list, howling at the door of sleep. Fear has a way of dressing up as productivity. You tell yourself you're planning ahead, but really you're pacing the same 3 anxious sentences. What if? What if not? What if never? Your brain tries to fix tomorrow by rewriting today, and it's exhausting, like a coach who calls practice at 3 a.m. and insists on sprints across the mattress. Sometimes it's not even fear of big things, it's the silly clutter. Did you leave the spoon in the sink? Did you lock the front door? Somewhere inside you, an archivist wants to check, stamp, and file every thought. You laugh, but monks in the Middle Ages had the same problem. Their manuals for evening prayer warned against phantasmata, ghostly intrusions of mind that disturb the soul's rest. Replace parchment with smartphone, and the complaint is identical: too much static, not enough stillness. The trouble is, silence amplifies. During the day, your mind's orchestra is drowned by traffic, emails, voices. At night, the hall is empty, so even a single violin of regret sounds like a funeral march. And the more you try to hush it, the louder it becomes. Have you noticed how telling yourself "don't think about it" works about, as well as telling a child "don't touch the cookie jar"? The thought practically somersaults into focus. Yet here's a curious twist: the brain doesn't just trap you with dread, it also rehearses your desires. You fall asleep planning the house you'll build, the speech you'll give, the trip you'll finally take. These two can become restless companions. The Stoics would smile grimly and call it what it is: attachment not only to what frightens you, but also to what tempts you. Both are weights on the scale, tipping you away from calm. You may feel this pressure in your chest right now, the little drumbeat of the heart that insists you've forgotten something crucial, though you can't name what. It's just your nervous system mistaking thought for danger. Like a guard dog barking at shadows, it keeps you awake to make sure the monsters of paperwork don't sneak up on you. The joke, of course, is that the real monster is the barking itself. But don't panic, we're not here to silence the mind with force. That would be like wrestling a fog. Instead, you can let the noise circle until it tires itself out, while you gently shift attention elsewhere, to your breath, the heaviness in your limbs, the fact that your body knows how to rest even if your mind is late to the meeting. Philosophy will enter soon with its lantern, But first you need to notice the chaos for what it is, unfinished stories begging for endings, and tonight, you're allowed to leave them unfinished. The world won't collapse if you don't answer. An email at 2 a.m. The dishes can wait. The argument can wait. Even the brilliant comeback you invented in the shower can wait. You don't owe the night productivity. You owe yourself rest. So while the food court in your head shuffles and clanks, you can choose to step outside. Let the stalls close. The announcements fade. The barista finally falls silent. This is the first lesson. Your mind is noisy because it cares, but you don't have to attend every performance. Sometimes, the most radical act is to ignore the encore. The chaos in your head is like a broken radio. You keep twisting the dial, hoping for a clear channel, but mostly you get static, with occasional fragments of melody. And just when you think you've found peace, another half-finished thought barges in, like a late-night caller demanding attention. But there's another way. Imagine if, instead of fighting the static, you reached for something older, slower, softer. Philosophy, not the dusty, exam-stained philosophy you once crammed in school, but the kind meant for nights like this, when the silence is loud and the mind is restless. Think of it as a library designed for sleepless people. Every shelf whispers the same reassurance. You're not the first human to lie awake with worries, and you won't be the last. Long before smartphones and deadlines, people stared at ceilings made of stars and felt the same pounding heart. Seneca, for example, wrote his letters on self-control and the futility of anger, while knowing full well his emperor might order his death any morning. His words, cool as mountain water, were not for classrooms, they were lullabies for survival. There's a kind of irony here. The world shouts, be faster, shinier, louder, while philosophy croons, slow down, sit, breathe. Ancient teachers weren't marketing gurus. They didn't care how many followers you had. They cared whether your soul could sit still. And you can almost laugh at how modern their advice sounds. Don't waste your energy on what you can't control, says Epictetus. That's basically the original version of stop doom scrolling Twitter at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether Stoicism's popularity in Rome came from intellectual curiosity or sheer desperation during times of plague and war. But either way, its medicine worked. You might picture philosophy as a stern librarian, finger pressed to lips, but in moments like this, it feels more like a grandmother who knows you're tired before you admit it. It doesn't silence your thoughts with commands. It hums them into smaller proportions. Suddenly, the deadlines shrink, the embarrassments fade. The broken to-do list looks less like a monster and more like a napkin scribbled with doodles. Even the Buddha, sitting beneath his tree, spoke about the endless parade of cravings and worries that rob us of sleep. His solution wasn't denial, but awareness. Observe the thoughts, he said, and watch them dissolve like mist. It's funny people traveled thousands of miles to hear his wisdom, and half of it was essentially, stop panicking, sit still. And here you are, 2,000 years later, needing the same reminder. Philosophy isn't supposed to fix your insomnia with a magic spell. It simply reminds you that your worries aren't unique, and that your rest is more important than your reputation. Think of Marcus Aurelius scribbling in his diary after another grueling day, as emperor wars outside the gates, betrayals in the palace, plague in the streets, and still he writes to himself, stay calm, care less about approval, return to reason. Imagine the candlelight, the scratch of the stylus, and the most powerful man in Rome confessing that he, too, can't stop overthinking. That's why philosophy feels like a lullaby. Because it isn't a lecture, it's a gentle weight pressed onto your anxious chest, saying, you can let go now. The ancients didn't write their meditations for professors. They wrote them for nights like this when you're stretched between exhaustion and restlessness, desperate for an anchor. And tonight, as the world outside hums with neon and engines, you get to borrow their anchor. Instead of scrolling one more time, you can lean back into sentences carved across centuries. They don't demand belief, they offer companionship. They don't promise eternal happiness. They whisper temporary calm. That's enough. So let philosophy tuck you in, like an old blanket passed from one sleepless soul to another. It won't chase away every ghost in your head, but it will sit with you until the ghosts grow bored and wander off. And maybe you'll finally hear the silence for what it is, not emptiness, but the oldest kind of comfort. You turn the page in your mind, and the faint light of philosophy grows brighter, not abstract anymore, not distant. You see a man, draped in a simple cloak, bent over a wax tablet by flickering lamplight. He's not in a scholar's study, but in a soldier's tent, or a lonely chamber of the imperial palace. Outside, Rome buzzes with intrigue, wars rumble on the frontier, and the empire waits for his decisions. Inside, Marcus Aurelius, emperor, general, ruler of millions, writes words not for us, not for the Senate, not for a history, but for himself. There's something strangely comforting about that image. One of the most powerful men in human history, and yet his nightly routine looked a lot like yours. Lying awake, trying to calm a restless mind, he didn't scribble about laws or taxes. He reminded himself of basic truths. Don't be ruled by anger. Don't crave applause. Don't forget that death comes for everyone. His meditations weren't essays, but whispered notes to a nervous soul. And that's the paradox. With every resource at his command, wealth, armies, marble palaces, he still faced the same human turbulence you face tonight. Historians still argue whether Marcus intended his private journal to survive, or whether it was sheer accident that monks copied it centuries later. But maybe that's the beauty. He never polished these words for publication. They are raw, shaky, sometimes repetitive, always sincere. They are the closest thing we have to overhearing the inner voice of a tired emperor trying to sleep. You can imagine the context. In 165 AD, plague swept through the empire, killing thousands each day. Marcus lost many of his own children before they reached adulthood. Even in the glow of Roman triumph, his nights were filled with grief, fatigue, and decisions heavy enough to crush anyone else. Yet instead of collapsing, he wrote. The pen, or rather, the stylus, became his shield. Philosophy became his pillow. What's quirky is that some of his sentences are so plain, they sound almost like sticky notes you'd slap on your fridge. Don't worry about what others think. Stay calm in chaos. Remember, you will die. You can almost see them taped to the imperial bathroom mirror. But beneath the simplicity lies genius. Because in moments of crisis, you don't need complex theories, you need reminders. Marcus didn't always succeed. He admitted to himself, again and again, that he failed to remain calm, that he slipped into irritation, that he envied or feared. But he wrote anyway, as if each page were a reset button. Isn't that exactly what you crave when you lie awake at night? A small reset, a way to clear the chaos and start over without being perfect. And here's the odd scholarly debate. Some historians see Marcus as the last good emperor, the philosopher King Plato only dreamed about. Others argue he was too gentle, too indecisive, and left the empire vulnerable by passing power to his unstable son, Commodus. But that tension makes him real. He was not a marble statue. He was a man who tried, stumbled, reflected, and tried. Again. So tonight, as you rest, picture Marcus Aurelius writing by lamplight. Hear the scratch of his stylus, as though it were your own pen across paper. Imagine the emperor telling himself, you don't need their praise. You don't need to win every battle in a single day. You only need to control your own mind. That same message crosses nearly 2,000 years to reach you here, whispering into your sleeplessness. You are not less than an emperor when you lie awake with your thoughts. In fact, you are more like him than you think. You, too, can use the stillness of night to remind yourself of truths worth keeping. Power doesn't come from ruling armies or commanding cities. It comes from ruling the one battlefield you always carry, the space between your ears. And if an emperor could admit his weakness, write his fears, and find strength in philosophy, Maybe you can too. You let the emperor fade back into the lamplight, and his pen leaves you with one stubborn reminder. Most of his pages wrestle with the same problem you do other people's opinions. It's almost comic, isn't it? Marcus Aurelius could order a city built or destroyed with a single decree. Yet he still had to talk himself out of worrying about what some senator or soldier thought of him. That's the trap, craving approval like it's oxygen, when really it's just perfume in the air. Nice if it drifts your way, poisonous if you try to breathe only that dot. You know this trap well. Maybe it's why you stayed up late polishing that email, why you hesitated to post that photo, why the offhand comment from a co-worker gnaws at you like a pebble in a shoe. The applause, the likes, the nods of respect, they feel like little hits of sugar, sweet, fleeting, and guaranteed to leave you hungry again. Here's the irony. The Romans had amphitheaters full of cheering crowds, and you have a rectangle of glass glowing in your palm. Same addiction, different interface. Social media just turned Caesar's thumbs up into an algorithm. Historians still argue whether Roman citizens truly adored their emperors or whether they were just terrified to boo. But the effect was the same. The ruler heard the roar and felt validated. Until, of course, the crowd turned dot, and crowds always turn. 1 minute you're brilliant, the next you're boring. One day you're the flavor, the next you're forgotten. Marcus reminded himself constantly that the voices of others are like wind in a marketplace, loud, shifting, never consistent. If you try to anchor your self-worth there, you're tethering to a kite string in a storm. But it's not just strangers, is it? Approval from the people closest to you can weigh even heavier. A parent's disapproval echoes for decades. A partner's criticism hums louder than traffic. A friend's silence feels like a courtroom verdict. You carry those judgments to bed, and they whisper in your ear, "Are you enough?" The answer never comes, because it isn't really a question, it's a leash. Oddly enough, ancient Stoics didn't say ignore everyone completely. They still valued community, family, conversation. But they drew a sharp line between listening to advice and being enslaved by opinion. Seneca once compared chasing public admiration to chasing shadows. You can never catch them, and in the attempt, you exhaust yourself. Think of your own day. How many choices did you make based on what you wanted versus what you thought would look good? The shoes you wore, the sentence you deleted, the laugh you forced. Sometimes it's harmless. Sometimes, though, it's the very reason you can't rest. Your brain keeps replaying the social theater, checking the audience's reaction. And isn't it absurd? You lose sleep because you're auditioning in an imaginary play where no one else is actually watching. Most people are too busy worrying about their own lines. If you could see how little time others truly spend judging you, you'd laugh yourself to sleep. The quirky part is that philosophers weren't immune either. They bickered over schools, followers, legacies. Even Marcus had to admit his desire for history to remember him kindly. But he wrestled with it. And maybe that's the point. You don't have to kill the need for approval entirely. You just have to see it for what it is, a flickering shadow, not a compass. So tonight, as you turn in bed and feel the tug of someone else's judgment, you can try Marcus's trick. He told himself, will this person's opinion matter in 100 years? In 10? Even tomorrow? The answer, most often, was no. And if an emperor could learn to breathe without applause, so can you. You are enough, even in silence, even when no one claps, especially then. The leash of approval slackens, but another trap waits nearby, the glittering lure of pleasure. You know the script. One more cookie, one more drink, one more click, one more season auto-playing until dawn. It feels harmless, even deserved. You worked hard, so why not reward yourself? But here's the cruel joke. The reward often steals more than it gives, leaving you awake, jittery and hollow, staring at the ceiling with sugar buzzing in your veins. The Stoics knew this cycle well. They watched Romans chase gladiator games, exotic banquets, and scandalous romances like moths around a torch. The empire's elite threw feasts that lasted 4 days, peacocks roasted whole, wine poured until the walls blurred, guests vomiting into feathered basins, so they could start eating again. It sounds absurd, but isn't your endless streaming queue a quieter version of the same? Different buffet, same binge. Pleasure isn't evil. Marcus Aurelius never claimed you should live in a cave gnawing on stale bread. The danger is mistaking it for meaning. When joy becomes a constant chase, it turns to emptiness. Like trying to quench thirst with seawater. The more you drink, the more parched you become. Historians still argue whether Rome's bread and circuses policy kept citizens truly content or merely distracted while the empire decayed. Replace circus with TikTok, and the question is painfully current. Think of your own small indulgences. The late night scroll, the extra slice, the impulse buy that looked thrilling online, but arrived feeling cheap. Each is fine in isolation, but string them together, and they weave a restless net. Your brain never learns contentment. It only learns craving. That's why you wake up groggy. Not refreshed. The body rested a little, but the mind never stopped chasing. Quirky fact. Some Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort to remind themselves that life didn't end without luxury. Seneca sometimes slept on a hard floor just to prove to himself he could. Imagine explaining that to your friends. Sorry, can't hang out. I've got an appointment with my cold stone tiles. And yet, the practice worked by showing himself he could endure less. He enjoyed more when it came. Your version doesn't have to be that extreme. Maybe it's skipping the midnight snack, or leaving the show on a cliffhanger instead of watching until sunrise. The paradox. By resisting, you sleep deeper. By choosing less, you rest more. Pleasure, after all, was never meant to be an anchor. It was meant to be a spark dot. So as you lie here tonight, tempted by just one more, you can borrow the Stoic trick. Pause, breathe, ask if this pursuit brings peace, or just postpones it. More often than not, the real luxury is letting go and closing your eyes, because emptiness dressed in glitter, it's still emptiness. And sleep quiet, undemanding, unadvertised turns out to be the sweetest pleasure of all. Your mind drifts, and the night deepens. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slams, reminding you how temporary every moment really is. And that, strangely, is where the next thread of philosophy leads, to the truth that nothing lasts, not applause, not pleasures, not even you. Memento Mori, remember you must die. Harsh words for bedtime. Maybe, but paradoxically, they work better than any lullaby, because they peel away the nonsense you've been carrying all day. Think about it. The stress that kept you pacing, the petty argument that replayed in your head, the half-dozen tasks haunting your to-do list, all of them shrink in the light of mortality. The Stoics weren't morbid for the sake of drama. They saw death as the clearest teacher. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that he was just a traveller passing through. Seneca wrote that life is long enough if you stop wasting it. Epictetus, though not a Stoic, famously argued that fearing death makes you miss life itself. Historians still argue whether the Romans were unusually obsessed with mortality or simply more honest about it than we are, surrounded as they were by plague and war. And here's the quirky part. Ancient Romans kept little reminders of death in their homes. Skulls carved into jewelry, mosaics showing skeletons lounging at banquets, even servants whispering, "Remember, you are mortal," during triumphal parades. Imagine being congratulated on your biggest achievement, only to have someone behind you whispering, "You'll die eventually." Strange, maybe, effective. Definitely, you don't need a mosaic skull on your nightstand, but think how different your worries look under this lens. That awkward email, dust. The neighbor's complaint, dust. Even the weight of ambition becomes lighter when you realize the finish line is the same for everyone. Far from depressing, this perspective can be freeing. When the pressure to impress fades, the present moment grows brighter, richer, easier to rest in. And perhaps that's why Memento Mori works so well at night. Instead of chasing more tasks, You pause and savor what you already have, the softness of the blanket, the quiet hum of a fan, the simple fact of being alive long enough to feel tired. That's not nothing, it's everything. So tonight, let the whisper of mortality calm you rather than frighten you. You are not here forever, which means you don't have to carry forever's burdens. All you need to carry is this breath, this moment, this chance to rest before morning. And isn't that enough? The thought of mortality lingers, but instead of fear, it brings a strange kind of clarity. You realize you don't control the length of your days, but you do control what you do with them. That, in essence, is the heartbeat of Stoicism. Focus on what is yours to command, and release what never was. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. You can't dictate whether your boss wakes up grumpy, whether it rains tomorrow, whether traffic snarls for miles. You can't dictate the economy, or your neighbor's mood swings, or the fact that your favorite series got cancelled after one season. Historians still argue whether the real tragedy of Roman culture was Nero's tyranny or the loss of too many scrolls to library fires. But either way, fans have always been disappointed by abrupt endings. What you can control is your response, your choices, your perspective. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who started life as a slave, said it bluntly: "You may chain my body, but not my mind." That's the Stoic superpower, freedom in the one place no tyrants, no accident, no circumstance can enter, the space inside your skull. Imagine how radical this felt in a world as unstable as Rome's: plagues, assassinations, invasions, fickle emperors. Yet the Stoics taught people to build an inner citadel, a mental fortress where calm could be maintained even if the city burned. Quirky fact: Marcus Aurelius actually used the phrase "inner citadel" in his writings, and modern psychologists have borrowed it to describe resilience training. So yes, even your therapist is, in some ways, a Stoic tutor in disguise. But Stoicism in action isn't just high-minded reflection, it's practice. You choose where to place attention, which thoughts to entertain, which emotions to let pass. You might fail a dozen times in a single day, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the return, the reset, the moment you reclaim your mind. Marcus scolded himself constantly, not because he was hopeless, but because he understood mastery isn't a finish line, it's a rhythm. And here you are, lying in the dark, still negotiating with your own thoughts. The storm outside your control holds news headlines, future uncertainties, the behavior of everyone else. But within your reach is a small flame, your breath, your focus, your choice to soften into stillness. You don't need the world to calm down for you to rest. You only need to stop offering it rent-free space in your head. Think of it this way: life is a theater, full of actors you can't direct. The weather improvises, your colleagues forget their lines, strangers bump into you in the aisle. Stoicism hands you one role only, your performance. And strangely enough, once you accept that, the chaos becomes easier to watch, even amusing. It's just the play of the world. So as you breathe tonight, let Stoicism be more than an ancient theory. Let it be a practice, alive in your chest. Focus on what you hold, the decision to let your shoulders sink, the kindness you can offer tomorrow, the stories you choose to believe. That's enough. That's always been enough. And in that choice, you may find sleep itself slipping closer, like a guest finally knocking politely at your door. You feel that small flame steadying, and now it sharpens into a line, an invisible border that the Stoics call the dichotomy of control. On one side, what belongs to you; on the other, what never did. Cross the line and you're lost in storms. You can't calm, stay within, and the night grows quiet again. It's almost laughably simple, like drawing two columns on a piece of paper. Things I control and things I don't. Your thoughts, choices, actions, values, they go in the first column. The weather, the economy, your neighbor's karaoke habit, they fall in the second. And yet, most of your stress, most of your insomnia, comes from trying to sneak items from the don't control list into the control one, like a kid slipping candy into the grocery cart. Marcus Aurelius practiced this nightly. He reminded himself, you can't stop people from speaking foolishly, but you can refuse to be dragged into their noise. You can't stop fate from taking loved ones, but you can decide how to honor their memory. Historians still argue whether his calmness came from genuine serenity or sheer exhaustion after years of war. But either way, his writings echo with the same refrain. Know the line. Here's a quirky fact. Epictetus loved using theatre metaphors. He said life is a play where you don't pick your role. You might be cast as a soldier, a beggar, even someone who exits early. You don't control the script, only how well you perform your part. Imagine lying in bed, anxious about tomorrow's meeting, and then realizing you're just an actor in one short scene. Suddenly, the spotlight feels less blinding. Think of how much lighter life would be if you respected that line. You wouldn't waste hours replaying a rude comment. You'd shrug, file it under not mine, and roll over. You wouldn't obsess about headlines you can't change. You'd scan them, sigh, and close the curtain. Even your body joints. The lesson: you can't force sleep, but you can create the conditions for it. Quiet, darkness, calm breathing. The rest, you surrender. Of course, you'll forget. Everyone does. Tomorrow, you'll probably cross the line again, clinging to things you can't shape. But Stoicism isn't about perfection. It's about remembering, again and again, that the border exists. Each time you return, you grow a little steadier, like tracing a groove deeper with every pass of the hand. So tonight, picture that invisible line glowing faintly across your thoughts. On one side, storms rage. On the other, you're small, sturdy. Boat floats in calm water. You can't silence the storm, but you don't have to sail into it either. Stay in your boat. Stay with what's yours, and let the waves crash somewhere far away. That line you drew, the border between what's yours and what isn't, becomes the foundation for tools, almost like the apps on your inner phone. Only, instead of draining your battery, these ones recharge it. The Stoics didn't just talk about calm, they engineered it with practices, exercises, routines that work just as well now as they did 2,000 years ago. Think of them as the original sleep hygiene, only with more tunics and fewer podcasts. The first is journaling, not the Dear Diary. Today I ate soup kind though. Honestly, nothing wrong with soup updates. The Stoic journal was a mirror scribbling what went wrong, where you lost your temper, where you caved to fear. Marcus Aurelius practically invented the midnight rant to himself, except his rants turned into wisdom. You can do the same. Before bed, dump your tangled thoughts onto paper. It's like emptying your pockets before laundry. You don't want keys and coins rattling around at 3 a.m. Then there's negative visualization, which sounds gloomy, but is oddly soothing. You imagine losing what you cherish, not to depress yourself, but to sharpen gratitude. Picture your morning coffee gone, your warm bed vanished, your friends silent. Morbid, maybe, but when you open your eyes and realize the coffee is still waiting, the bed is still soft, and your friend just texted a meme, suddenly you're rich again. Historians still argue whether the Stoics borrowed this from Eastern traditions like Buddhism or invented it independently. Either way, it's basically ancient gratitude journaling with a dramatic twist. And then voluntary discomfort. Seneca's favorite party trick. He'd wear shabby clothes or eat bland food to remind himself that luxury wasn't a need, only a preference. The point wasn't suffering for its own sake, but proving to himself that fear of discomfort is worse than discomfort itself. Imagine trying it modern style, turning off Wi-Fi for a day, sleeping on the floor, eating plain rice. You'd probably complain, but afterward, Netflix and pillows would feel like miracles. Quirky fact: Roman philosophers sometimes practiced walking barefoot on sharp stones as a reminder of resilience. You don't need to raid your neighbor's gravel driveway, but the principle holds. Tiny, chosen hardships build big strength. What links all these practices is rehearsal. You're training the mind the way athletes train muscles, by facing discomfort on purpose. You're less rattled when real hardship arrives. By writing down fears, you strip them of their costumes. By imagining loss, you taste gratitude. Each is a lullaby in disguise, not sugary but sturdy, the kind that rocks you into resilience rather than distraction. So, picture yourself tonight as a kind of apprentice philosopher. You may not own a toga, but you can still pick up a pen, breathe through discomfort, or quietly thank the universe for what hasn't vanished yet. These little acts aren't homework, they're small spells of calm, cast against the noise of the world. And maybe, as you settle back into your pillow, you realize the tools of ancient Rome fit neatly into your bedside drawer. Philosophy isn't marble statues, it's practical bedtime gear. You've gathered the tools, the journal, the small discomforts, the gratitude sharpened by imagination, and now comes the real test, using them in the messy theatre of everyday life. It's one thing to nod along while reading Marcus Aurelius in a calm room. It's another to remember his advice when the Wi-Fi dies during a Zoom call, or when your neighbor insists on practicing the trombone at 11 p.m. Philosophy is easy in theory, but in practice it's more like juggling flaming torches while standing on a skateboard. Start with journaling. Picture yourself at the end of a frantic day. Emails unanswered, tasks half done, your brain buzzing like a fridge. You sit down and write. I lost my patience with a coworker. I ate junk food even though I promised not to. I scrolled instead of calling a friend. On paper, it looks small, not monstrous. That's the secret. Thoughts shrink when you drag them from the dark into ink. Marcus did this every night, listing his failings like someone airing out laundry. You can almost hear his sighs between sentences. Historians still argue whether these notes were therapy or discipline, but either way, they worked. Then there's negative visualization, sliding into daily life like an unsung superpower. You wake to find rain hammering the windows, commute ruined, mood spoiled. Pause. Imagine, instead, that you had no roof at all, no warm socks, no coffee brewing. Suddenly, rain looks like background music, not disaster. The Stoics weren't masochists, they were realists. They knew your brain adapts fast, always moving the finish line. So they practiced pulling the line back, reminding themselves of what could be lost, and in doing so, treasuring what was still here. Voluntary discomfort sneaks in, too. Maybe you bike to work instead of driving, shivering in the cold. Maybe you skip dessert or leave the cozy blanket behind for a bracing walk. The point isn't punishment, it's rehearsal. You discover, to your surprise, that you're tougher than you thought. Seneca wore coarse cloaks to remind himself that silk wasn't a need. You wear last year's sneakers and realize fashion won't kill you. Quirky detail. Roman Stoics sometimes fasted 4 days, not to diet, but to laugh at hunger. They treated cravings like noisy toddlers. You don't need to obey every scream. Modern life offers endless arenas to practice. The checkout line, where someone argues about coupons. The online comment that sparks irritation. The co-worker who interrupts again. Each is a training ground. Instead of reacting, you test your new muscles, breathe, step back, choose calm. It feels awkward at first, like rehearsing a foreign language, but soon you notice your default reaction softening. You're not dragged into every quarrel, not rattled by every glitch. And here's the fun paradox. By practicing small hardships, the big ones lose some of their sting. When life actually sideswipes you, illness, job loss, heartbreak, you're not invincible, but you're not shattered either. You've been training quietly, like a soldier who runs drills in peacetime. Marcus Aurelius didn't write Meditations as a book for others. He wrote it as a training log. You can do the same, except your arena might be traffic jams instead of barbarian invasions. So tonight, as you rest, think of one practice you'll carry into tomorrow. Maybe it's jotting down your stubborn thoughts before bed. Maybe it's walking with less comfort, just to prove you can. Maybe it's whispering gratitude when you sip water, knowing it's a luxury emperors once prayed for. Philosophy isn't meant for marble halls. It's meant for checkout lines, emails, heartbreaks, and sleepless nights. That's where you'll find its real weight, quiet, steady, and just heavy enough to anchor you against the winds of chaos. You've practiced alone, scribbling in your journal, testing yourself in the quiet theatre of daily annoyances. But the hardest stage is always other people. It's easy to play stoic monk when you're lying in bed listening to rain. It's far tougher when someone cuts you off in traffic or delivers that sly little insult you'll replay for hours. Relationships, friends, family, lovers are where philosophy either breathes or collapses. The Stoics were blunt about it. You can love deeply, but you can't own anyone. People are not possessions. They are travelers moving alongside you for a while. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that those he loved could vanish at any moment. Not to grow cold, but to grow tender, to treat each meeting as precious, not guaranteed. Historians still argue whether this made Roman affection more fragile or more intense, but the lesson stands. Love without chains is love without fear. Picture it in your own life. You're anxious because your partner didn't text back quickly enough. Your mind spins stories. Are they annoyed, bored, drifting away? But pause. You don't control their thumb on the screen. You only control your trust, your patience, your choice not to spiral. The Stoic in you smiles and says, their silence isn't my enemy. My thoughts about it are. Forgiveness, too, gains a sharper edge here. Epictetus compared anger to holding hot coal. You burn yourself first. So when a friend disappoints you, or a sibling drags up old grievances, you get to practice releasing the coal. That doesn't mean excusing harm. It means refusing to scorch yourself in the name of justice. The quirky fact. Ancient Romans sometimes carried tiny charms or amulets engraved with maxims like endure and abstain. Imagine pocketing one before a family dinner. It might save you from 3 arguments. And then there's acceptance. People will be who they are. The gossip, the braggart, the sulker. You can spend decades trying to remodel them like a stubborn piece of furniture. Or you can accept the wood as it is and simply decide where to place it in your life. Marcus said, when you wake up, expect to meet the meddling, the ungrateful, the arrogant. He wasn't being cynical. He was lowering expectations, so he could meet people with calm rather than shock. You can try this tomorrow. Expect someone to frustrate you. Expect someone to ignore you. Then, when it happens, you're ready, not resentful, just steady. And when people surprise you with kindness instead, it feels like an unexpected gift rather than a rare exception. Relationships built on Stoic ground aren't cold. They're warmer. Because when you don't demand perfection, when you forgive easily, when you love without fear of loss, you give people the freedom to simply be themselves. And in that freedom, intimacy deepens. You're no longer negotiating a contract of constant reassurance. You're sharing a space where presence is enough. So tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, think of the faces in your life. Let them be imperfect. Let them be human. Let them be free. That's the Stoics' version of love. Not chains, not demands, but a steady flame that doesn't flicker with every gust of disappointment. And maybe, in that kind of love, you'll find the calm that has eluded you in restless nights. The faces you love may soften your nights, but the wider world rarely spares you. Out there, it's criticism, conflict, and the constant hum of social pressure, like living under a spotlight that you never asked for. Maybe it's a boss nitpicking your work, a stranger rolling their eyes, or that invisible chorus of what will people think that pipes up even when no one is looking. If craving approval was one trap, then fearing disapproval is its evil twin. The Stoics understood this all too well. They lived in societies where public reputation could decide your career, even your survival. A single insult in the Roman Senate might unravel alliances, just as a single rumor in your office chat might color how others see you. Yet Marcus Aurelius kept writing to himself, "Remember, their judgments are just noises in the air." It sounds simple, but imagine telling yourself that while legions waited for your orders. Historians still argue whether Marcus truly believed this or just repeated it like a mantra to keep from unraveling. Either way, it shows how stubborn the pressure of public opinion can be. Think of your own life. A careless comment from someone you barely know sticks to you like gum on a shoe, while 100 kind words slide off unnoticed. It's absurd, isn't it? We give more weight to a stranger's frown than to a friend's loyalty. The Stoics laughed at this imbalance. Epictetus quipped that we worrying more about others' judgments than our own conscience, like being more concerned about whether the neighbors approve of your cooking than whether it's poison. Conflict 2 is a nightly ghost. Arguments replay in your head, each version edited, so you finally deliver the perfect comeback. But who are you fighting at 2 a.m.? Only shadows. Quirky fact: some Stoics actually practice premeditation of insults, imagining ahead of time the worst things people might say. So when insults arrived, they landed like dull stones rather than daggers. You can try it, too. Picture tomorrow. Someone will criticize you. Someone will misunderstand you. And when it happens, instead of bristling, you can shrug. Ah, there it is. Even bigger than criticism is the weight of social norms, the pressure to dress, speak, succeed, and live according to the script handed to you. Marcus warned himself not to waste his life chasing the values of the crowd. Yet how often do you scroll through someone else's highlight reel and feel the tug to compete? It's the same circus, new costumes, but here's the gift Stoicism offers: detachment, not as cold indifference, but as armor. Imagine criticism as rain. You don't stop the sky from weeping, but you can carry an umbrella. That umbrella is perspective. The insult belongs to the speaker, not to you. The gossip is their shadow, not your reflection. You can walk on dry inside, even as the storm falls. So tonight, if echoes of criticism keep buzzing in your head, try this. Imagine the words floating away like soap bubbles, fragile and empty. Let them drift until they pop in silence. Your worth isn't written in someone else's complaint, it's written in how calmly you carry yourself through the noise. And in that shield of calm, you might finally hear the quiet again, the lullaby waiting behind all the clamor. The shield of calm sounds noble in theory, but history gives us living proof of how it works when life becomes unbearable. Imagine being shot down in a warplane, parachuting into enemy territory, and waking up in a prison camp. Your body is broken, your freedom stripped, your captors cruel. You don't know if you'll see your family again, or even if you'll survive the week. What could possibly keep the mind from collapsing? Enter James Stockdale, an American admiral during the Vietnam War. In 1965, his jet was hit, and he was captured, spending over 7 years as a prisoner of war. 7 years let that number linger. While others around him despaired, Stockdale clung to something unusual: the words of Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher he had studied before his mission. Those lessons became his lifeline. He later admitted that without Stoicism, he might not have survived at all. In captivity, Stockdale endured beatings, isolation, and psychological torture. Yet he built an inner citadel, just as Marcus Aurelius described. He reminded himself daily, "I don't control what they do to my body, but I control my choices, my honor, my mind." He even created secret codes of communication with fellow prisoners, tapping messages through walls so that no one felt alone. Historians still argue whether his Stoic strength was pure philosophy or sheer human grit, but the line between them blurs. Philosophy, after all, is just grit with a compass. Here's a quirky detail: Stockdale once purposely disfigured himself, smashing his own face with a stool so his captors couldn't parade him in propaganda films. That act sounds brutal, but to him, it was control, choosing dignity over humiliation, even at great cost. That's Stoicism in its most extreme form, finding freedom in places where none should exist. Think of how that translates to your quieter life. You're not locked in a prison cell, but you do face days where circumstances feel like a cage in illness, a dead-end job, a relationship turned sour. Stockdale's lesson is the same. Don't surrender the last freedom, the one Epictetus insisted was unbreakable, the freedom to decide how you'll respond. And there's a softer lesson, too. Stockdale recalled how hope, when misplaced, could break a person. Prisoners who clung to "will be out by Christmas" often crumbled when Christmas came and went. Stockdale instead practiced what he called the paradox: confront the brutal facts of your reality, but never lose faith in your ultimate strength to endure. That balance, honesty without despair, hope without illusion, is the essence of Stoicism. So tonight, lying in your safe bed, you can borrow courage from a man who survived a nightmare. Your struggles are different, yes, but the principle is the same. You don't need the world to soften before you can rest. You need only to claim the one fortress that no captor, no critic, no circumstance can storm your own mind. And maybe, if Stockdale could find calm in a cell, you can find calm here, in this ordinary, restless night. The Admiral's story lingers, like the echo of steel striking stone, but now the night grows softer. You've followed the thread from noisy streets to the Emperor's tent, from restless thoughts to quiet practices, from the craving of approval to the calm of letting go. What remains is the simplest truth of all. Strength isn't about dodging life's blows, but about shaping your response when they land. You can see it clearly now. The world outside will always spin in noisy emails, sirens, gossip, demands. Your own mind will always tug at you with cravings, fears, unfinished business. Trying to erase that chaos is like trying to hold back the tide with a broom. But Stoicism whispers, you don't need to clean the ocean. You only need to sail your small boat wisely. Every practice you've heard tonight, journaling, negative visualization, forgiving, detachment, even embracing mortality, points to one thing: choice. You don't control the stage, but you control your role. You don't control the weather, but you control whether you curse the rain or sip it as music. The line of control is narrow, but it's enough. It always was. The quirky part, you already know this. You've tasted it in small ways, when you let an insult slide instead of biting back, when you laughed at your own clumsiness instead of blushing, when you forgave instead of festering. Those moments felt lighter, didn't they? That's Stoicism in action, though you might not have called it that at the time. Historians still argue whether Stoicism is a rigid philosophy or a practical toolkit, but in practice it feels less like marble and more like breath. So what to do now, tonight? Nothing heroic, nothing grand, just one thing. Remember the line: as tomorrow comes, when worries rise like crows at dawn, you can choose again. Write them down, release them, love. Without chains, stand firm in storms. Not perfectly, no one is perfect. Not flawlessly, even Marcus stumbled, but steadily, as a rhythm. And as you lie here now, you can let that rhythm settle into your breath. The empire can burn outside. The crowd can roar or sneer. Pleasures can tempt and fade, but your mind remains yours. That, in the end, is all. The strength you need. Slowly now, let's close the circle. Your eyes are heavier, your body warmer, the hum of the world muted by the softness of night. The Stoics didn't ask you to conquer the universe, they only asked you to meet it with calm. Strength is not a clenched fist, it is an open hand resting quietly, steady even in the storm. So surrender to rest, not as escape, but as practice. Each night, letting go of what you can't hold, and each morning, picking up again only what's yours. This is the discipline, the lullaby, the secret that emperors and admirals both whispered to themselves. I will not control the world, but I will control how I walk through it. Let that truth cradle you now, like a final candle flickering low. The night is not your enemy. It is your training ground, your teacher, your pillow. Breathe, soften, trust the silence. The world can wait until morning. The story closes, but it doesn't really end. Philosophy, like sleep, is something you practice every day, sometimes failing, sometimes stumbling, always returning. What you've heard tonight isn't a lecture to memorize, it's a rhythm, to carry, soft as a heartbeat, steady as breath. You began with noise, the restless world, the gadgets, the unfinished lists. You traveled through chaos, approval, craving, fear. And you found your way to ancient wisdom. Marcus, Seneca, Epictetus, even Admiral Stockdale, each reminding you that the only fortress worth guarding is the one inside. The walls are not stone but attention. The weapons are not swords but choices. And the victory is not conquest but calm. Let that sink deeper as you drift. You are not here to impress the crowd, not here to chase every craving, not here to fight battles in your head. You are here, for now, to rest, to close your eyes and let the night stitch you back together. So feel the weight of your body sink into the bed. Hear the faint hum of the world fading beyond your walls. Let every unfinished task, every sharp word, every restless craving fall away like dust. Tonight, you practice the art of release. Tomorrow, you'll practice again. And when you wake, you'll carry with you not perfection, but steadiness. Not a shield against life, but a lantern through it. That's all philosophy ever promised, and it's enough. Sleep now. The world is wide, but your breath is steady, your heart is calm, and the night is yours.